In a dry cave in southern Oregon, an archaeologist lifted something out of the sediment that had passed through a human being 14,300 years ago. Not a tool that might have washed in from somewhere else. Not charcoal that might have come off a wildfire. A person, directly dated. It is the oldest directly dated human material anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. And in the same cave, in layers of the same age, there were spear points. They do not look like Clovis points. They are not a rough version of Clovis, or an early version, or a local variation. They are a completely different way of making a weapon, and they were being made at the same time, which means the story was never one group of people arriving and spreading out. The site is called the Paisley 5 Mile Point Caves in the Summer Lake Basin of south-central Oregon. Lake County, high desert, sagebrush, a dry lake bed that was not always dry. They are not deep caves. They are shallow chambers cut into a ridge by the waves of a much larger lake that has since shrunk away. And what makes them valuable is that they are dry. Dry is the whole thing. In wet ground, organic material rots. Bone survives sometimes. Plant fiber, hide, wood, and anything soft is gone within a few thousand years. In a dry cave, dust settles, nothing decays, and material that would be invisible almost anywhere else in North America simply sits there, which is why the site produced something that almost no site produces: dried human waste. The technical word is coprolite, and it sounds like a curiosity until you understand what it actually is. It is a person directly, not something they made or dropped, not something that ended up near them. It is human material, and it can be radiocarbon dated on its own, and DNA can be pulled from it. The work was led by Dennis Jenkins at the University of Oregon. In 2008, he and an international team published in Science that they had human DNA from coprolites in those caves, dating to around 14,300 years ago. Jenkins has described what happened next as an enormous amount of noise. The site went from obscure to internationally famous inside a week. And then the objection arrived, and I want to give it properly because it is the single most dangerous objection anyone has raised at any site we have covered. DNA moves. Not the bone, not the artifact, the DNA itself. Genetic material can travel through sediment carried by water. And a cave that people used 14,000 years ago is a cave people kept using. For thousands of years afterwards, humans and animals were in there, urinating on the floor, and urine carries DNA. So the charge was straightforward. The coprolites might be genuinely ancient, and the human DNA in them might be recent, having leached down from layers above. There was a second problem too, and it is less famous but just as sharp. Telling a human coprolite from an animal one is not simple. Something a dog produced after eating human food can look human by more than one measure. Put those together, and you have the worst possible situation for a claim like this. The dating and the identification are pulling against each other, and the thing being dated is the entire argument. If the DNA is not ancient, there is no site. Most people would have written a defensive paper and moved on. Jenkins went back to the cave for 3 more summers. From 2009 through 2011, the team excavated with the specific goal of answering the leaching charge. And the way they answered it was volume. They took 121 new accelerator mass spectrometry dates out of those deposits. In total, the site now rests on more than 190 radiocarbon dates from artifacts, coprolites, bones, and sagebrush twigs, pulled from well-stratified layers of silt. That is not a site defending one number. That is a site that has been dated more thoroughly than almost anything else on the continent. The coprolite DNA went out for blind testing at independent laboratories, meaning the researchers did not know what they were looking at or what result anyone wanted. It held, and then the excavation produced the thing the site had been missing: artifacts. Part of the original problem was that Paisley had almost nothing manufactured in it. Jenkins has been open about that. They had human material and very few objects, and that gap is exactly what made people suspicious. The 2009 to 2011 digs recovered Western-stemmed projectile points. They also recovered a serrated bone tool, and when that tool was radiocarbon dated, it landed in the pre-Clovis range and held there. Then Jenkins did something I have not seen at any other site in this series. In the autumn of 2009, he invited the skeptics to come to the cave, not to a conference, to the site, an archaeological summit in the field where the people who did not believe him could stand in the sediment and look at the stratigraphy themselves. Several of them changed their position. That is the inverse of what usually happens in this field. At Monteverde, the delegation had to be organized before the wall came down, and it took decades. Here, the person under attack sent the invitation himself 2 years into the fight. But the coprolites are not actually the most important thing to come out of Paisley Caves. The points are: Western-stemmed projectile points are named for their bases. Instead of a concave base with a channel flaked out of it, which is what makes a Clovis point, these have thick stems that the shaft was fixed to. That is not a decorative difference. It is a different answer to the same problem, which means a different way of selecting stone, working it, and attaching it to a shaft. A different set of habits, taught to somebody by somebody else. For a long time, the assumption was that Western stem technology developed after Clovis. It was later, so it came from Clovis. The Paisley dates say it did not. The points there are the same age as Clovis, and the site contains no diagnostic Clovis material at all. Jenkins put it plainly. Two different traditions were coexisting in what is now the United States, and they did not blend for hundreds of years. And there is a detail underneath that which matters more than either date. Clovis technology has only ever been found in the New World. Nobody has located an ancestor for it anywhere else. Western stem technology can be related to patterns seen in northeastern Asia. So the two traditions are not one story with a branch in it. They look like two arrivals, on different schedules, carrying different toolkits that were in the same landmass at the same time and stayed separate. Which is why I would argue this cave changes more than the sites that produced older dates. Pushing a date backwards moves one number. Paisley breaks the shape of the story. It replaces a single founding population spreading outward with something messier, with more than one group, more than one route, and more than one technology running in parallel. And I want to be direct about something because this subject attracts people who want it to mean something it does not. None of this takes anything away from anybody. Older dates and multiple routes make indigenous presence on this continent deeper and more complicated, not shorter. The people in that cave were somebody's ancestors, and this work makes their history longer. The story did not end in 2012 either. In 2017, an international team returned to Paisley to re-examine the sediments and the coprolites, specifically to settle the leaching question one more time. Their results were published in Science Advances and confirmed the original finding. People were living in those caves 1,000 years before Clovis. That is 3 separate rounds of testing across roughly a decade at a site whose central claim is the most fragile kind of evidence there is, and it is still standing. What I keep coming back to is the invitation. Jenkins was 2 years into having his work publicly doubted, and his response was to ask the doubters to come and stand in his trench. That is either enormous confidence or it is the correct way to run an argument, and I suspect it is both. Tell me which part of this you find harder to accept, that the oldest directly dated human material in the hemisphere is dried waste in an Oregon cave, or that there were 2 separate tool-making traditions in North America at the same time that never mixed. I go back and forth on which one is stranger. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there are a lot of them, and I am working through them one at a time. And if you are out in that part of Oregon, or you have hunted the Great Basin, I want to hear about it. Tell me the county. Thanks for watching.